shut, the January window, and I know you wrote about this, that nothing really happened. Now, a lot of people commented on it, and I know you enjoy your Twitter comments and the replies on the YouTube and things that you get quite regularly in this regard. So you will have seen this, no doubts at all, that people saying, oh, it's standard January quiet, nothing, alluding to a big summer. But it is talked about a lot. Liverpool have to do stuff this summer, don't they? We can't just go into next season with like 7 or 8 players. There's a surely one way or another got to happen, even if it is 1 in, 1 out.
Yeah, but I'd be very, very wary, and I did not write this in the piece. In fact, the very first line of the piece, for anyone who didn't get to read it, was basically knocking down the idea that it's, you can guarantee it's going to be a busy summer because it wasn't that busy in the winter. I think anybody who's promising that is being daft, really, because the fact is Liverpool will do what they need to do. So, okay, as a starting point, the one thing I think you can guarantee that Liverpool will do is sign a left back, and there's going to be some decisions to make there around Costas and Robbo, and one of those maybe moving on. I think Costas it was a possibility, moved on last summer, by the way. So I think that's going to come back around, and we'll see how that plays out. But I think left back is a clear area to improve this team. Yeah. But anything that happens beyond that, it will be 1 in, 1 out. Because as I said, I can't say Liverpool have got the best squad in the league and then say, okay, well, they're going to throw thousands of millions of pounds at it next summer because they absolutely have to rip things up. It's going to be all about replacing people who leave. So if they're going to sign a centre-half, there's a massive possibility Joe Gomez goes. In fact, I would expect that he does go now to go and play more regular football at the end of this season. Darwin Núñez is attracting big interest from Saudi Arabia, and although that was not back in January, expect that will come to something in the summer, so he's going to need to be replaced. And then, there's all this talk about a kind of central midfielder as something that needs looking at, but I think people will be surprised. For me, I don't think it's going to be a starting quality central midfielder. I think you've got your clear 3 there. What might change is maybe, someone like an Endo might get jettisoned, might decide he wants to go and play more frequently elsewhere. If that happens, get someone who's multifunctional, can play all across the midfield as covering, and is someone of the profile that maybe Arne Slot fancies a little bit more than he does Endo. But the idea that Liverpool are going to go into this and going to absolutely throw a load of cash at it, I don't agree at all, because they don't need to. And I actually think as well, when you talk about the potential sales that they could be making as well, there's every chance that Liverpool could break even on net spend here, which, again, people are like, oh, they're not, FSG aren't spending very much. But so what? If you put together a squad that is good enough to compete on 4 fronts again, and you replace Núñez and you replace Gomez with players who are, hopefully the right quality, which Liverpool tend to do, then Liverpool could be in an excellent position to push on all fronts again. So I think that should be the approach of window. So any journalist or anyone you see out there who's promising they're going to go big in the summer, I don't believe that for a second, because I don't think they need to. And I think a lot of it will depend on what the outgoings look like mostly. But, also a couple of areas where you can clearly strengthen, which I think left back is the number one priority there.
Yeah, it would. Anyone's guess what's happening this summer. And I suppose any guess this summer does relate a little bit to what's happening at the moment. Now, I might be wrong on this, but I'm pretty sure from where you sit in the journalist box, you may just have been able to peer in towards Richard Hughes. And is there any truth or awareness that you have in the story that Richard Hughes may just have had a bit of company in the form of Virgil van Dijk's reps last night?
Yeah, he was just behind me, actually, just over my kind of left shoulder. So I did see him there with Virgil's representative. So yeah, that's kind of interesting. I mean, the one thing I would say is I've seen so many reports recently that suggesting that, it's done and Liverpool are keeping it under wraps. I can absolutely shoot that down. That is not the case as far as I understand it. For starters, it's extremely unrealistic that would be possible. There's no way that would be possible, because it's, if you get maybe Salah and Van Dijk had signed their contracts, the amount of people who would have to know about that process, and the amount of people they tell the brother, or they tell their uncle or whatever, and then that information can leak from there. Yeah. It's just not possible to keep these kind of things under wraps. So my experience is, when I worked at the club, as soon as those contracts are signed, or as soon as a player is signed, it gets announced immediately, because you just want to get it out there before it can leak. So that is generally how these things work. So anyone who's espousing that theory, and I've seen a few reports that that's the case, I would dismiss those immediately. They are definitely not true. I can categorically say that. But equally, it's good to see Virgil's reps there. That, they're not just there for a holiday. They're not just there for a laugh, and they're not just mates with Richard Hughes. That is interesting. And I get the sense very much still, my understanding, that there's everybody's still relaxed about it. Nobody's panicking yet. There's still a belief that it will get done. So I think that's a step forward. But as I say, take any reports that he's done and being kept quiet with it, not just a pinch of salt, just dismiss them outright because they're not true.
Fair enough. And it must be good news that they're in the ground. They're sitting next to Richard Hughes, because talks surely have got to be underway, because it's the greatest centre-half maybe the Premier League's ever seen in that regard. He's our skip, but we've got to keep him. So we will see what develops on that. And the only other thing, which I suppose links to a little bit of the summer, I'm sure you saw this. It's interesting what the Athletic clipped up, because there's two players there, Benjamin Šeško, Nico Williams, one a Red Bull forward, one an Athletic Bilbao winger, both mentioned by David Ornstein as admired by Liverpool. Šeško, especially the way he phrased it, Liverpool were quite keen on him last summer. Williams, a player they long time admired. Have you heard anything on these two around Liverpool's interest, potential move, anything in that regard at all?
No, personally, not much at all, really. I mean, obviously, I would never doubt David Ornstein, what a fantastic reporter he is, and his contacts are basically second to none in world football. So I'd never question him, whether he's right about that. But it is a long way, I would also say, from admiring a player to that being someone you'd necessarily target. I mean, for me, Nico Williams doesn't score enough goals as a left wing option for Liverpool. You look at what Gakpo is doing. I mean, maybe Liverpool feel that they could get more of that out of him, but he's not particularly prolific, and they tend to look for players who've got a kind of track record for that stuff, and they feel that they can bring that. So that's a kind of interesting one, and also the competition around him will be massive, won't it? And the wages will be huge as well. So I don't know if he's someone Liverpool would be desperate for. And of course, if they were to sign someone like him, a left winger, it would have to be because someone like Luis Diaz left, 2 years out from the end of his contract at the end of the season, definitely admired in Europe. So we'll see how that plays out. But I'm not massively in on the idea that Liverpool are going to follow up interest in Williams. And Šeško is another one. If Darwin Núñez is to leave, Liverpool are going to be looking for a centre forward. Can he bring that form from the Bundesliga to the Premier League? He's still very young, quite raw, I think, from what I've seen of him. That's an interesting name, and maybe, to me, kind of maybe chimes as one that feels a little bit more realistic. But of course, again, there's going to be a lot of competition around that, and we know how frequently really are Liverpool's transfer targets kind of previewed from this long out, and then they end up signing them. I think they always tend to go down a different route in the end. I have no doubt whatsoever scouts are regularly watching both players, but in terms of that turning into anything, I haven't heard anything concrete yet.
Yeah, there's always names that brew, like Matheus Nunes a couple of seasons ago, and they just never come to fruition. It's always a completely different name that breaks late or closer to the time. And Mr. Wars asked a question there that I think it's good, because I wanted to sort of link it to something else. Diaz, because you mentioned him. The link between them are Diaz and Jota, both 28, will both have 2 years left in the summer. Now, that's kind of a pinch point quite often for this regime. We know how Michael Edwards operates. It's usually renew, sell, or very rarely it could be run down. What are your thoughts on those two at the moment, Diaz and Jota? Because there are question marks against both.
Yeah, I think you look at Diaz. I mean, he's been hugely helpful this season, hasn't he? Filling in that centre forward role. He started the season, very well on that left hand side, but he is 28. There is that interest in him. He is 2 years out, and I think you can see from his agent's side of things as well that they've been clearly kind of using that interest and kind of been pushing for either a new contract or a sale. So I think there's a big decision to be made there in the summer. I think that's an interesting one that he couldn't really predict will go either way. I mean, it's interesting. Liverpool haven't seemingly open contract talks with him yet. So, that makes me kind of lean towards the idea that they'll think maybe we could turn this around, turn him over and get that money in and maybe go for someone else who's a little bit younger. So I think that's very much one to keep an eye on him. And with Jota, in a similar boat, of course, but I think the situation is made different by his injury record. I think Liverpool would struggle to sell him at this point. but I also think they'd be very reluctant to give him a new deal with the injury record he's had in recent years. So for me, Jota's almost a kind of no-brainer, really, for someone you keep around. You don't want to be utterly reliant on, but it's an absolutely huge bonus when he is available. And kind of use him like that. If you swap Núñez out for someone who's more reliable, then Jota can compete with that player. But you almost let him run down and get to the end of his contract and say, okay, well, we got our money's worth out of that. That to me would be the sensible approach with Jota and probably the likeliest approach. Whereas Diaz, I think they will maybe think they can get some cash for him in the summer. So that's an interesting one to keep an eye on.